Alright, in this video we're adding supports to the game. In the last video we added a few tanks. I'm only going over 5 supports this time because I took the time to kind of, flesh out their kits a little bit more and think through their kits. So this is going to be maybe a little slower paced than the last video because I'm actually going to talk about their abilities and I actually tried to build the character this time to make a more compelling argument for their inclusion, more or less to show, okay, this is how this character could work, these are some of their abilities, these are like their ultimates, etc., right? To really sell you on the idea that this is a character that could be added to the game. So jumping right into it, let's start with Black Cat. Black Cat is a Spider-Man character, to my knowledge. I don't really think she comes from anything else. She is mostly like a stealth thief kind of character. You could make an argument that Black Cat works better as a DPS, but I think because she's stealth focused and more focused on like being a thief, not really getting into direct confrontation, I think she works better as a strategist. Her main appeal would be her main ability would be the ability to apply stacks of good luck and stacks of bad luck to the enemy team. Well, stacks of good luck to her teammates, stacks of bad luck to the enemies. The way stacks of good luck work is when good luck is applied to an ally, they receive a bit of healing over time, and they also gain a bonus based on what role they're playing. So if an ally has a stack of good luck and they're a tank player, they take reduced critical hit damage. If they're a DPS, they get increased ult charge rate, so they gain more ult charge per shot and more ult charge when they use their abilities. If they're a support, they gain reduced cooldown on their abilities. Now that might be a little busted. You could change that to maybe be increased healing on their healing abilities. Whichever one is more balanced or whichever one is more fun. If bad luck is applied to an enemy, specifically if it's applied to an enemy tank, they take increased headshot damage. If bad luck is applied to an enemy DPS, they get reduced ult charge rate. And if it's applied to an enemy healer, they have reduced ability cooldown, or they have increased ability cooldown rate, or depending on which is more balanced, they deal less healing, right? So again, whichever one is more balanced, I think would be fine. So how does Black Cat apply stacks of good and bad luck? Essentially, Black Cat is a mid to close ranged strategist. So she functions much better in kind of rush or brawl style comps where everyone is kind of playing together. And this is more or less how her kit works. So her primary fire would be a whip combo. Yes, Black Cat has a whip. I know Catwoman's thing is a whip, but I really could not think of a proper primary fire for Black Cat that wouldn't be trash, right? Like, you can't just give her a claw swipe like Black Panther, because then she has to play too close to people, and she's supposed to be a support. So having a support be like right up in people's face, trying to swipe at them with a claw, right, just seems like it's a recipe for disaster. So giving her like a mid to close ranged whip attack or a whip combo seems like it's the most like logical idea. You could also give her like guns if you wanted to, but like pistols or something like that. But I think that that's less interesting and kind of boring. So I went with a whip combo. I'm sure someone else could figure out some other primary fire for Black Cat that makes more sense, that enables her healing, but this is what I went with. So when Black Cat deals damage with the whip to an enemy, the targeted enemy receives stacks of bad luck, and allies around Black Cat receive stacks of good luck. So it functions kind of like Brigida's Inspire, if you ever played Overwatch, with the idea being damaging enemies applies the negative effect, but procs a AoE effect that applies good luck to your nearby allies. And when I say nearby allies, I mean something like 10 to 20 meters, right? Seems like it would be fine and balanced somewhere in that ballpark, just so that, nothing as big as Brigida Inspire, because Brigida's Inspire radius is ridiculous. It's huge. Maybe something along the lines of like Lucio's healing radius would be reasonable. But the idea is the more times you hit an enemy with your whip, the more stacks of good and bad luck are applied to those around you. Now, bad luck is not applied to the enemy team in an AoE. It's only applied to the enemies that are hit by the whip. Her secondary fire or her E ability, right, whatever your alternate ability is, not your ult fire, would maybe be something like a whip shot, right, where she just cracks the whip at someone really hard. Maybe it charges, right, and the longer you charge it, the more stacks of bad luck you apply to the enemy, and the more stacks of good luck are applied to your allies. She would also have something like a dash or a little like cartwheel dodge or something like that. Something similar to Star-Lord, where she gets like invulnerability frames when she's dashing. Of course, she would have the ability to like wall climb because she's Black Cat, right? She can sink her claws into the wall and like climb along the wall and stuff like that. And then she would have a grappling hook that functions a lot like Widowmaker's grapple, where it's not like Spider-Man where you can like stick to it and build up that momentum and swing around corners. It's more like, here is a singular destination, target that destination, and the grappling hook will take you in that direction and like carry your momentum that way. This is probably easier to convey if like you've ever seen how Widow's grappling hook works. As for her ult would just probably be something that applies the maximum stacks of good luck and bad luck to both the enemy team and her allies. Maybe in something like a 30 or 40 meter radius. I think that would be kind of interesting. Now, the idea is that she is not meant to be this high number healer, right? She's supposed to be more similar to Mantis or Adam Warlock, where her primary focus is not necessarily healing. She's more like DPS adjacent as opposed to being like a direct healer. So if you're looking for a character that just sits in the back of the map and spams heals, Black Cat wouldn't really be that kind of character. But if you're playing a hyper aggressive dive style, brawl style comp, Black Cat offers something that's kind of unique in the sense that she's really only talented and skilled in that environment. Or if you're running like triple support, Black Cat is probably pretty good just because you bring that utility of applying bad luck to enemies and applying good luck to allies. Alright, so next up is Green Goblin. You're beginning to see a theme here. That's probably going to continue throughout the rest of the video. So how Green Goblin works, again, I know a lot of people might be saying, Green Goblin, shouldn't that be a DPS? But again, we already have like 3 DPS that are flyers. I think we can have like 2 supports that are flyers. And also I think the way that I kind of designed his kit works for him being a support. I also think it's funny to have villains as support characters, so I'm going with Green Goblin. Of course, Green Goblin has the ability to fly. He's on his glider, which grants him the same type of flight as maybe Human Torch, where he has a general flight speed, and then you can like activate his boosters that increases the speed at which he flies around, and that's on a resource. His primary fire is his pumpkin bombs, so he's going to throw these, and if they direct hit an enemy, it deals bonus damage, right? Like it deals direct hit damage, but after these pumpkin bombs land, they'll explode and emit a gas that kind of sits in the location that it exploded in, and this gas will apply healing to allies and damage over time for enemies. Now, nothing crazy, right? It's just, I was imagining something similar to maybe for allies, it would be something like Ultron's drone, right? The effect that Ultron's drone has, that level of healing. And to enemies, it would be something like less than Cloak and Dagger's mud puddle that she leaves behind when she uses her ult. Again, these numbers can be kind of fine-tuned so that they're balanced. I think what would be kind of interesting is that the gas effect stacks. So if you throw multiple bombs at the same location and have multiple instances of the gas in one location, it deals bonus damage, right? Like the damage effect stacks, or the healing effect stacks. And of course, you wouldn't leave it on the field for all that long. Maybe like 2 seconds is how long these gas effects last. One of the unique things about Green Goblin is that he would have 2 health bars, similar to Diva and Hulk, except he's still only, 200, 250 HP. And the idea is when his health bar is reduced to 0 for the first time, his glider will break and he will be forced to play on the ground. And at this point, his health will drop down to maybe like 125 or like 150 or something like that. His rate of fire would probably be decreased, right? So he can't throw as many pumpkin bombs. But even if his rate of fire is the same, he still can't like throw them at as aggressive of angles as he could before, because he's not up in the air where he has like the entire view of the map. He also has limited mobility at this point. He has no way to like move or block damage, so he's pretty vulnerable in this state. The only thing that I would give him while he's in his de-glidered state is he has a kick similar to Zenyatta that pushes enemies back. Now, the reason why I think you should give him this kick is it's a reference to Green Goblin and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man's fight in Spider-Man 1, where Green Goblin kind of kicks him through a bunch of rubble in an abandoned building. Just thought it would be kind of like a fun little reference that they could throw in there. As for his ult, if you've seen Blade's ult really recently, in like the reveal that they did for Blade, I would do something kind of similar to this, not in the sense that it applies anti, but Goblin basically flies in a straight line or in a predetermined path forward, and he carpet bombs the area or the flight path that he's traveling in. This leaves a bunch of gas on the ground. It drops a bunch of goblin bombs on the ground, or pumpkin bombs on the ground, dealing damage to enemies and healing allies. I think that's it. I think that's basically all you have to do for his kit. Maybe you could do something like give him a dash, right? That he can dash into enemies to deal damage, or just use as a mid-air dash to like get out of bad situations. But honestly, him having the ability to fly is more than enough. It makes him a really hard target for like melee DPS and stuff like that. So I don't really think you need to give him a whole lot for his kit. He's a pretty simple character in terms of like what he does in the show and in the comics. So, there's not much more that you really need to elaborate on there. So that's the Green Goblin. Okay, so this next one is the last Spider-Man verse character, right? The last Spider-Man related character, I promised. And this would be Silk. So the idea behind choosing Silk is we have two Spider-Man related tanks in Venom and Penny. We have Spider-Man as a DPS. We're probably going to get Miles Morales at some point as a second DPS. And I think you could even throw Spider-Gwen in there as a secondary DPS if you wanted to. You could also maybe make her support, right? You could put her as a support here if you wanted to. The main problem I had with trying to make Spider-Gwen work as a support is I could not figure out a logical way to make her apply healing to her teammates. Now, this could just be an error on my creativity, so if you're crazy and you can come up with a way to give her healing that makes sense, hey, go crazy, right? This spot is Spider-Gwen's spot instead of Silk's spot. But I also think Silk is kind of like an underutilized or underrepresented character in the Spider-Verse, so I think it'd be kind of interesting to show her some love here. So, how Silk works is her primary fire is webs that heal allies and damage enemies. So she actually has organic webbing, similar to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. So, she shoots allies, it covers them in her organic webbing, and her organic webbing has healing properties. In the same way that, like, Luna shoots you with ice, and her ice has healing properties. Or Cloak is literally throwing daggers at you, and it heals you, but damages allies. So it's like, if that works, right, it comes from their body, right, it's a part of their like energy or something like that. So I think that kind of works. You can do something similar for Silk, I would imagine. It's, again, like, not the most sound explanation, but cut me some slack here. Second, she would have a dodge ability similar to Star-Lord, because she's supposed to be very acrobatic. So, even if it's only like a on the ground dodge, or like while she's climbing on walls, she can dodge, that kind of thing. I think that's fine. Like, right, she doesn't need to have like a midair dodge like Star-Lord does. One of the unique abilities that Silk has is her Silk Sense, which is supposed to be like stronger than Spider-Man's Spider Sense, but it's faulty because sometimes it triggers when there is no danger around, so she often ignores it. So I actually think you could incorporate her Spider Sense into the gameplay in a unique way, and that just be she gets a little notification over her head when the enemy has an ult nearby. So if she's standing by a nearby enemy and they have their ultimate, her Spider Sense will occasionally go off. I think that could be kind of a cool mechanic for her to make her a bit more unique from Spider-Man. Just a thought. As for her ultimate, I'm going to be honest with you, I have no idea what she would do for her ult. Maybe she could apply a bunch of webs to the ground that slow enemies and heal allies, kind of similar to Penny. Again, no clue. Go crazy, right? Be creative. They made Penny work, so I'm sure they could figure something out. And of course, she has all of the other like universal Spider-Man abilities, right? So she has a web swing, right? Probably like 2 or 3 web swings, the web zip, she can climb on walls, she can stick to ceilings, she has a double jump, that kind of thing. Not the most like flashy or crazy support, but it just feels kind of weird that we're so close to being able to play a full Spider-Man inspired team and we don't have supports for Spider-Man, right? To represent Spider-Man. So I think this could be a cool way of, giving Spider-Man a support rep, right? That's also in the Spider family. Oh, also, Silk is hot, so like that's kind of one of the big reasons why I thought it would make a good pick. Same thing with Black Cat. You gotta sell those skins. Like, come on, those are easy skin sells. So just something else to consider. Okay, so I lied. The next 2 characters are technically kind of, sort of Spider-Man adjacent. They're related in some way, depending on how far back you go. And that's Firestar and Iceman. Now, listen, I'm a big Spider-Man fan, but it's not that I couldn't come up with other supports that aren't related to Spider-Man. I just, when I was coming up with kits, I was like, wow, these kits are really interesting, and they just so happen to all be, somewhat related to Spider-Man. So I apologize if you're not a big Spider-Man fan, or if you think there's too much Spider-Man representation in this video. Maybe I'll do a second one that covers some of the other supports that I had in mind that aren't related to Spider-Man characters. But anyway, let's talk about Firestar, because I think I actually did something kind of interesting here. So first off, her primary fire is a long-ranged beam-style poke attack. Think Ultron's beam, except it's a mix between like Ultron's beam and Jean Grey's beam. So it doesn't have that wind up burst that Ultron does. It's just the hit scan beam primary fire, right? Maybe you make the primary fire heal, maybe you don't. I'm not convinced that you need to make it heal, because we're going to give her a secondary effect, that doesn't require her primary fire to heal. Microwave Burst is her secondary ability that deals damage to enemies and the constructs around her. This ability also provides burst healing to her team. So think things like Punisher Turret or Loki clones or Loki totems, right? When she uses this ability, it'll deal bonus damage to those constructs around her while also dealing damage to enemies and healing allies. And like the radius for this would be something reasonable, like 15 or 20 meters. Her main source of healing would come from a Lucio-style aura around her. So in the same way that like Storm has the Storm area effect around her that either gives you speed boost or damage boost, Firestar has the healing effect. And maybe you would make it so that like the closer you are to Firestar, the greater the healing, and the further you are away, you know, the weaker the healing is. And maybe you, to make up for, you know, how strong healing has to be in this game, you increase the radius of her healing effect. So instead of Storms being, I think, like 10 meters, 10, 15 meters, maybe Firestars is something like 20, 25 meters, something like that. I think would be kind of interesting. And of course, the numbers would have to be semi-low, right? Like they can't be anything too crazy, unless you're standing like right on top of her. Then the healing is actually pretty good. I don't know, I think that would be kind of interesting. Of course, she has the ability to fly, so she flies around kind of like Human Torch and Storm at like a slower rate. Maybe you give her a dash ability similar to Iron Man. A lot of these characters have dash abilities now that I'm like looking back on this and actually recording it. But something not quite like Iron Man where he like goes into this flight state for a prolonged period of time, but more like Black Panther's forward dash, right? Something akin to that, I think, would work for her character. Maybe even make it so that you can like chain dashes. So maybe she has like 3 dashes and you can chain them, but they only move in a single direction. And she leaves behind like a burning effect over time. That would be kind of interesting. Honestly, I feel like that ability should have been given to Human Torch, but I think it could work here. As for her ultimate would be something like Psionic Disruption, which gives increased AoE healing, right? So it increases the radius of her healing, and it locks enemies out of their ultimates while they are in the radius of her healing effect. So if her healing effect is like 30 meters, the increased radius is now like 35 or 40 meters or something like that. And enemies within that radius can't use their ults. And the reason for that is like the lore reason for her abilities states that like she has the ability to like disrupt people's psychic powers and stuff like that, because she's like, what is she? She's like microwave radiation or something like that. So I think this would be kind of cool. Maybe you give it so that maybe you give it an effect where like if enemies are in that radius, they also take like damage over time. I don't know. It could be cool. You could really cook, pun intended, if you're the dev team, to make this character kind of interesting. But just like Jeff and like Squirrel Girl, I feel like Firestar is kind of a forgotten Marvel character. Like she doesn't get talked about all that much, and I still remember her from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. So I feel like it'd be kind of cool to see her as, you know, kind of a random pick that they throw in there. Also, you know, just like I mentioned before with the other 2 characters, she's hot, both literally and physically. So like she's a redhead. Go crazy, right? Like look, skins sell. I don't know what to tell you. Like look at the Luna skin, right? Look at the Cloak and Dagger skins. Look at the Invisible Woman skin, right? This makes them money. If you want money, you know, put characters like this in the game, and I'm sure you'll make some money. Also, they're a support character, right? So more people will play support if she's hot and she happens to be like really interesting to play. When designing her, I wanted to make something that's not too like healing focused. Like there's healing involved in the kit, obviously, but it's not like just sit on main and spam healing, because I think that that's kind of uninteresting. I want to you want to design these supports to have like more interesting abilities or generate more interesting playstyles than just point at your allies and heal them, right? Because that's just kind of boring, and we already have like 4 supports that already do that. So something kind of to mix things up, like how Lucio, again, in Overwatch, has that AoE healing. I think you could incorporate something like that into Marvel Rivals, and I think that would be really interesting and unique. Speaking of Lucio, if you wanted to, you could give her a healing boost ability, right? Where when you activate it, she deals damage over time, like burn damage over time to enemies around her, and deals increased healing to allies around her, and that's on like a cooldown, right? Maybe that is the burst ability that I talked about before that deals damage to constructs and enemies. I don't know. Again, cook, go crazy, but Firestar is cool, and I think she shouldn't stay forgotten. You should definitely look into adding her to the game. Let's move on to the last hero we're going to discuss, which is Iceman. Okay, so Iceman's kit might actually be my favorite that I've created so far. So basically how he works is his primary fire is a short-ranged stream of cold energy that is like think Moira's primary healing from Overwatch, where it's like this gas form. It's something similar to that, right? And the idea is allies that you hit with this heal over time. Of course, they get increased healing while they are directly in the stream, but after they leave the stream, they also continue to get a little bit of healing over time. Again, similar to Moira's primary healing. But it also functions as a damaging attack, where enemies hit by this stream take damage, of course, while they're in the stream, and when they leave the stream, they'll also continue to take damage over time for a short duration, maybe like 1 or 2 seconds after they leave the stream. I think that would be kind of interesting. Again, it's not long range, so I don't think it's super broken. It's something like, maybe 10 or 15 meter range, I think would be kind of fine. His main ability, like his unique ability, would be Ice Surf, which allows him to... It's more like a reposition ability instead of a flying ability. So basically what he does is he does the, the thing that Iceman is known for, where he like puts ice in front of him and skates on the ice, and he can like go up in the air and stuff like that, do loop-de-loops, turns, crazy stuff. You basically add that to the game as a movement ability that's on a resource similar to Star-Lord's flight ability, right? So you push the button, you fly in, like you move forward, and you can like kind of control how you move forward. And you can go up and down, left, right, side to side, etc. And then after a short period of time, or when the resource runs out, you will jump off of that ice and reposition. And of course, you're like carrying your momentum when you do that. Now, I think it would be really cool if allies could use the ice, the ice walkway that he makes. But I also realize that that's maybe, like, this game already has a netcode that is made of like toothpaste and band-aids. So that would probably destroy the netcode and the game's performance. But if you could make that work, that would be kind of interesting and kind of sick. And maybe you just put that resource on a pretty long cooldown, right? Or maybe he has to like heal or deal damage to get that resource back. Whatever you have to do to make it balanced. But I mean, you can walk on Groot walls, right? And Groot walls are a construct that you can put on the map. So you can kind of do something similar with Iceman if you really wanted to. And I think it would be really neat. Another one of his abilities would be something like Cryo Freeze, where the ability basically he shoots like a ball of ice at the ground that freezes the ground in that area. And allies that walk on that frozen ground gain increased movement speed, while enemies that walk on that ground are slowed. Allies also receive increased healing while they're on frozen ground, and enemies that are on the frozen ground that take damage from Iceman, like maybe it's like after a few seconds, will be stunned or frozen. Not for like as long as Luna's stun, but maybe something like Scarlet Witch's orb thing, like area effect that stuns you for like half a second or something like that. Maybe it's something kind of like that. Now that it's, again, yeah, you can maybe adjust that. Maybe that's a little too strong. But given the fact that he's not really a range character, he's supposed to be kind of mid to close range, I think that could be kind of interesting and that could work. And finally, let's talk about his ult, which isn't anything too crazy. He just applies frozen ground to a large radius of the map. So like he explodes outwards and it applies frozen ground to like the walls, the ground, and in the ceiling, in maybe like a 40-meter radius or something like that. And while he is standing on frozen ground in his ultimate, he gains shield, and frozen ground functions the same way it did when it's used as his normal ability. So enemies are slowed while they're in frozen ground, and allies gain increased movement speed. Now you could maybe also do something similar to Kiriko's Kitsune, where allies on frozen ground in his ult gain reduced cooldown on their abilities, so their abilities come back faster. That would be kind of interesting. Maybe the frozen ground generates shield for allies that are standing in it. Maybe the frozen ground just deals damage over time to enemies, right? You can kind of play around with this concept and see what works, see what's a little too strong, see what's a little too, maybe too oppressive, that kind of thing. What we don't want is just another ult that is just immortality. Your whole team lives forever until the ult runs out, right? You don't want that. The role is called strategist, / support. So I want to make ultimates that have like utility, but can also be used for a little bit of healing, right? Or can enable healing and that kind of thing. Really, the idea is to make ults or abilities for the support cast that enable your DPS to do things, or enable your tanks to play the game. Not necessarily just keep them alive, because keeping like just permanent sustain, just keep your teammates alive, is kind of boring, right? And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from for when it comes to support players. Is it's like, okay, my job is literally to just sit here and click on my teammates for the whole game, and like that's it. All of my abilities just allow me to do that better, right? And it's like sometimes that's what you need, but it would be nice to have other options that aren't just click on my allies to heal them. This is why like one of my favorite supports to play is Mantis, because your primary goal is damage boost your team and heal them, but you need to fish for headshots in order to do that really effectively, right? So she's very active. She feels very engaging to play. It's just a shame that she's, not super strong this last few seasons, but that's a topic for another day. Anyway, that's my 5 supports. Again, I apologize that they are basically all Spider-Man related supports. But, if you have some suggestions for support heroes or heroes that you would like me to kind of flesh out in the way that I've done these 5 heroes that you think would make good supports, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I did have some other supports in mind, such as, like MODOK, I think would make for an interesting support. He's also a villain, and you know how I feel about villains in the support role. I love it. Gambit was another support that I thought would be kind of interesting. I know a lot of people would probably say he should be a DPS, but I thought, hey, could be kind of interesting to see Gambit as a support. Elektra might be kind of cool as a support. Professor Xavier would be really interesting as a support. I also felt like Miss Marvel and Captain Marvel would work really well as supports, even though I mentioned them before as tanks. So with all that, thank you all for watching. Again, leave your suggestions down in the comments below. I can't wait to read them. I do read all of them. And I will catch you in the next one.